So we will take care of business with several different hosts, including myself this morning, Charlie Rood, extending my time from the morning team now into the Art Lewis Show this morning on WSGW. And we appreciate you being along with us this morning. We're going to engage in conversation this hour that I don't think we're going to get through in 1 hour because there's just so much we can talk about when it comes to this issue. And we have invited a special guest to talk about what's happening in the world of college sports these days. You will certainly recognize his name and his voice because he's involved in college sports. I don't know, do we call that your second job? Because officially you are the executive director of communications with Saginaw Valley State University, a one-time member of the WSW News team and staff. J.J. Boehm, good morning and welcome to our studios.
Yes, good morning, Charlie. Happy to be here. And yes, I very much enjoy college athletics. I've spent my entire adult life in and around college athletics. And there are portions of what are now college athletics that I barely recognize as college athletics.
Which is why I asked you to come in this morning and talk. You know, on Friday mornings we talk SVSU football. And after we're off the air, sometimes we'll engage in certain conversations. And I've been asking you, I mean, the landscape of college football. I'm a sports fan, and I think I used to know what used to be happening in college sports. I'm not sure I recognize it anymore for two reasons. I'm going to throw these out. The landscape of college football has changed dramatically in the last couple of years, thanks to the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness. You have players that can move and play where they want, and they're earning millions of dollars to play college football. Two things that, how long ago, 5, 10 years, would have never even been thought of.
Well, they never would have been thought of. And so if we go back, let's say 10 years ago, okay, so before any of this was taking place, I think we had a system that was not fair to the student athlete, because you have the student athlete who is playing for their scholarship, and I don't mean to minimize that in any way, shape, or form, but meanwhile, you in many cases did have the university selling that student's jersey with their name and number on it in the bookstore and profiting off of that. You had coaches making millions of dollars in their salaries, and they could move and accept another job whenever they wanted, but the student was bound by his or her scholarship. So you had that system. Well, now we've gone 180 degrees the other direction, where, yes, I mean, you essentially have free agency each season in college athletics, because you can now transfer. You don't have to sit out. You have the ability through what is still called name, image, and likeness. I don't agree with that terminology, and I can explain that here in a moment. But you have, because of what is now called name, image, and likeness, players are able to then, yes, go into the transfer portal and go out and say, all right, I'm going to take my services as an athlete to the highest bidder. Well, I'm going to pause there, because the way that name, image, and likeness was originally conceived, and that I still think has a lot of merit, is, okay, you're Charlie Rood, you're the star baseball player at XYZ University. Because of your name and notoriety, you have built up some goodwill in the local community. And so if you want to say, you know what, local business, I would love to tell people, come to this pizza joint, go to this coffee shop. Can I help you promote your business using the name and notoriety I have built up for myself through my performance as a student athlete? I think that's wonderful in many respects. It's the free market at work. It's learning the value that you can produce, and then how your name, your image, your likeness can then help grow another business. I think all of that is terrific. What we have instead now is these collectives, as they're called, where boosters and others say, well, I want to make sure that my team wins, so they throw a bunch of money into this collective that then is administered essentially by the university's athletic department to then dole out money to player A, player B, player C, and that's a very different thing. This station carries the University of Michigan football games. The highest paid person at the University of Michigan, as we speak, is an 18-year-old quarterback named Bryce Underwood. Not the president of the university, not the athletic director, not the football coach. No, the highest paid person at the University of Michigan is an 18-year-old quarterback. And I emphasize that part because I do not fault the young man for taking advantage of the opportunities that were set before him. But you're essentially paying someone on the production that you can forecast, not actual results even on the field, let alone in the classroom, which is a whole separate conversation these days, right? So to your point about how in a very short span of time, we have gone to what had been a fairly rigid adherence to the amateurism model to now something that in many respects resembles the wild, wild west as it pertains to student athlete eligibility, profiting, all of those things.
And as much as you get a lot of attention to this at the major D1 universities, this actually has now affected what happens at D2. SVSU has felt the effects. D3, it's all encompassing. It's not just one segment.
It absolutely is. I will say, for the time being, as the landscape currently stands, I think there's a ton of value in the Division II model that SVSU and Northwood, in our local community, these are two schools that still have the Division II model where the vast majority of your student athletes are on a partial, and I emphasize partial, athletic scholarship. Now, they can get an academic scholarship on top of that. They can get need-based aid on top of that. So in many cases, the student may not have a lot of out-of-pocket costs, but they are not there solely on an athletic scholarship to pay for their schooling. Division II, you are allowed to work a job, either in season or out of season. Remember, that's something else that is true at the Division I level that they always said, and I believe the rule is still intact, that if you are a Division I student athlete, you cannot be employed. Think about that for a moment, okay? But they were concerned about the ability for no-show jobs, which did happen. I mean, all of the things that you can imagine going wrong did go wrong. So then they tried to write rules to legislate it, except now it's gone, again, to something that I can barely recognize. But so at the Division II level, you still have, again, student athletes who are balancing all of the facets of life. They are competing in athletics at a very high level. Okay, let's just go and look within our state at the Detroit Lions. There's 53 players on the active roster for the Detroit Lions. 2 of them are graduates, and I emphasize graduates, of SVSU. Okay, Trevor Nowaski is in now, I believe, his 3rd season for the Lions, and Nick Whiteside is an incredible story of someone who was an undrafted free agent coming out of SVSU, was on the practice squad for the Washington Commanders, got activated at the end of his rookie season because Ron Rivera, who was the head coach of the Commanders at that time, he liked what he saw from Nick Whiteside, gave him a chance. Well, Commanders had a bad year. Ron Rivera was let go. Nick Whiteside then no longer had a spot. And so he bounced around. He played in the UFL for the St. Louis franchise this past spring. Stayed in shape. In training camp, the Lions have injuries in the secondary. Well, the local kid from Auburn Hills, let's see if he can come in and be at practice tomorrow. Well, guess what? He can. He did. He did very well in training camp. Didn't make the roster coming out of training camp. But Nick Whiteside stayed in shape, continued to wait for his opportunity. Then the Lions had more injuries in the secondary. They brought Nick Whiteside in on the practice squad. More injuries in the secondary. So they activate him. And last week on Monday Night Football, he plays 40 snaps. He breaks up 3 passes. His PFF grade, which is how they grade your performance as a football player, is off the charts. And now the Lions are going to have difficult decisions when players come back who were the starters and are healthy to say, well, this Nick Whiteside rookie, well, not technically a rookie, but very limited experience player out of SVSU, he just played a whale of a game against the Buccaneers, who had only 1 loss going into that game. So it's amazing to see those opportunities. And I remind people, those 2 guys, Trevor Nowaski and Nick Whiteside, they played their whole careers at SVSU. So you do not have to jump into the transfer portal to make the NFL. You can do that. And SVSU, to your point, there are 3 players who would have been starters for SVSU on defense this year who all took advantage of that to move up to Division I opportunities. Brandon Rawls, linebacker at Oklahoma State. Eli Gordon, safety at CMU. Jasper Beeler, safety at Northern Illinois. I do not, again, you have young men who are trying to make the decisions that they think are in their best interests, and I'm not faulting them for doing that. But what you are also starting to see, and you can really, really see this in the sport of men's basketball, is players are going to use their 4 or 5 years of eligibility at 4 or 5 different schools. Who's your alma mater? Where are your relationships? When your playing days are done, whenever that is, what do you call home? I mean, all of these things that we think about somewhat nostalgically, but I also think in some cases for good reason, having been around as long as I have now, of your alma mater, that place that you can go back and it's always home, and they helped shape you into the young man or young woman that you were, and maybe you come back now. We're celebrating the 1975 inaugural team at SVSU. Those are no longer young men, okay? But they're able to come back and they're having wonderful experiences and reunions and all of those kinds of things, and I don't know what that's going to look like. So there has been an absolute sea change, and I don't know what the full future portends. I think the NCAA model, as we know it, isn't going to exist very much longer. There's so much money at stake. The Big Tens and the SECs of the world are going to say, we're making so much money that we can go off and do our own thing, and we probably don't need to have all of that revenue shared with the NCAA and the 300 and some Division I member institutions. We can go off and do the Bowl Championship Series, the football playoff that everyone talks about. That is completely outside of the NCAA right now, and people don't always understand that. So yes, as you said, we're barely going to scratch the surface with some of this, but for listeners who, again, there are plenty of people who I think are what I would describe as that casual fan. They're not paying close attention, but they enjoy watching or listening to a college football game on a Saturday afternoon, right? That's part of what they enjoy. It's one of their outlets in life, whether they're coming out to a game in person at SVSU, listening to it at WSGW, watching a game on TV, whatever it might be. They enjoy that. And for many of them, they have a memory of what that has always been, but modern reality is nowhere near a close reflection of what that memory is in so many cases.
And there you have the conversation, as I mentioned and JJ just reiterated, that could take us in a lot of different directions. We'll try and focus it in particular areas when we return with more. JJ Boehm of SVSU, the executive vice president, the executive director of communications, I should say, and of course our broadcasting voice for SVSU football. And we're talking the state of college sports and where we've gotten from where we just were a couple of years ago. It's unrecognizable. What's next? Don't know. We'll find out when we come back.
Since 1947, Clayton
wellness exam. At Covenant Healthcare, our primary care providers deliver high-quality, patient-centric care. In fact, 9 out of 10 of our patients give us the
Art Lewis Show this morning on WSGW. Again, Art Lewis is starting a vacation. My name is Charlie Rood, and I'm handling his show today, and the conversation we're having as we welcomed in J.J. Boehm from Saginaw Valley State University. J.J., who calls the SVSU Cardinals football games for us. Well, he actually calls them for the university. It's just that we broadcast our games, I guess. We could say that.
It's a partnership, so you can describe it from either perspective. Both are true.
And a colleague of ours for many years, working in our news department and more. The state of college sports. A lot of focus happens on football, and you mentioned basketball, which I think a lot of people understand. When it comes to college sports, those are your money makers.
Yep.
Because of the revenue that can be brought in because of the event that they are, and the TV contracts that are tied to it. No question. I get that. We're talking this morning, though, about the state of college sports just because of the way that the landscape has changed, and JJ gave us great explanations when it came to both the money that's being earned by these athletes and the ability to go and play wherever they want on a yearly basis. So, well, it happens, as you mentioned, and it can happen below the Division I level. It gets all the attention. That's where a lot of the money is made and where a lot of the transfer portals take place. I get that. What is the state, though, of the Division I student athlete now? And it's not to take away, because there are many athletes that still do get that education. I understand that, but it's been upended to the point where a lot of people have said for years, and we'll take college football, for example, there is no minor leagues for the NFL. College is their minor leagues. So the NFL has a vested interest when it comes to what's happening at the college level, including if there's money that's necessary to be paid to a university to get the kids some experience. I'm guessing the NFL is all in.
Well, I think there's some truth in that. Here's how it's affecting even a school like SVSU. SVSU is among those that is going to be introducing the sport of women's flag football as a varsity sport. It is one of the fastest growing sports at the high school level currently, and it is growing at the college level also. Why? The NFL is helping to fund the development of women's flag football as a sport, because if you have more people interested in and playing the sport of football, you have more eyeballs watching the sport of football on television, so you can sell more advertising, so you can generate more money. Okay? So I also think it's going to create new opportunities. I am all for young people being able to develop holistically while they are in college. We're talking about it in a sports context today, and I think there are many great benefits of that, but that could also happen musically. That can also happen theatrically. There are lots of ways that you can have that holistic development as a college student during that formative phase of your young adult life. I am in favor of providing those opportunities to young people because I think it will allow them to be more successful over the course of their adult life. Now, returning it back to the sports piece for a moment, yes, you do have the NFL, who certainly has, as you said, a vested financial interest in having a pool of athletes who are going to continue to play that sport, which is by far the dominant sport in the United States of America from a revenue perspective, because you get to play in 60 and 70,000 seat stadiums. There's all kinds of revenue that flows from that. You have all of these TV contracts, because think about it now. You always have a Thursday night game that's nationally televised. You always have a Monday night game that's nationally televised. You have a Sunday night game that's nationally televised. Those are all three separate and distinct revenue agreements, plus what happens on the traditional Sunday afternoons with those traditional networks. So there's, I would also say, going back to college sports more generally, when you understand that a big piece of what is happening at the highest levels of Division I athletics, you're putting together programming for a television network. whether that's the Big Ten Network, the SEC Network, whatever it might be. That's why you now have I grew up in Big Ten country. I'm a native of Chicago. Okay. You're a native of the Detroit area. Okay. This has always been considered quote unquote Big Ten country. Wait, what's not Big Ten country anymore? I guess Alaska and Hawaii. Because you
For now.
I was going to say, because you literally go from coast to coast. And it is one thing for the sport of football that only plays one day a week. It's one thing for that, although we already saw what happened this season when Michigan State had a game out on the West Coast that did not kick off until 11 p.m. Eastern Time, which means that game doesn't get done until after 2 a.m. Sunday morning Eastern Time. So tell me how it's in that young person's best interest when they've now got to fly back and they've got a class at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. How is that in the young person's best interest? How are they expected to perform their best academically when that's the environment? So I point this out because what we have always talked about as the student-athlete model, well, that isn't what we remember it again, even just a few short years ago. And again, it's one thing for the sport of football, but think about now your golfers and cross-country runners and tennis players and field hockey players and all these other kinds of things where, okay, Rutgers, you're going to fly out on Thursday and then you're going to go play Oregon, UCLA, USC, all in the Big Ten. These are your conference matches now. And then you're going to come back and take a 5-hour flight home. But again, what it does do is it gives you lots of good programming for the Big Ten Network, and you've got lots of advertisers that want their product to be promoted on the Big Ten Network. So from a revenue standpoint, from a business standpoint, all of this makes sense. But I don't think we've begun to fully consider, let alone realize, what that is going to do for the young people who are doing what they love. They're playing their sport that they have always played and that they love playing, but so much is being sacrificed in terms of their overall college experience because of all of the additional travel time and the other demands that are now placed upon them.
Which is what is the experience for the overwhelming majority of kids who go to a university, that college experience you're talking about. When we get into some of the conversation we're having here, it's highlighted by a select group of players, highly talented. I mean, we're talking upper elite athletes who are going to advance to play in a professional aspect. But most don't. Most have to have that education to fall back on. And most will do nothing more than play in those other sports you're talking about that will end as soon as their college career ends.
Correct. And even if you have a successful professional career, let's say you get to play 10 years professionally. Okay, that's an incredibly long career at the NFL level. That's a long career at the NBA level, Major League Baseball, whatever it might be. You're now in your early to mid 30s. What are you going to do for the next 30 years? Right? And so I agree that the value of having the full college experience, learning a discipline that then you can also apply as a professional, continues to have great value. And I think that is too often undervalued in the conversation, but it's undervalued in the conversation because there is so much financial value now on the immediacy. And I point out the immediacy because just this college football season, we have seen James Franklin, the head coach at Penn State, fired in the middle of the season. We've seen Brian Kelly, who I have interviewed many times because he started his career as a head coach at Grand Valley. He just got fired as the head coach at LSU. Each of them are going to be paid more than $50 million by their respective flagship state universities not to coach. So that's over $100 million from these two universities going to two people not to coach. because so much emphasis is placed on immediate success on the football field. Okay? My judgment has been and continues to be, if you're going to get rid of a college coach for performance reasons, do that after the season. Okay? You're still talking about 18 to 22-year-olds where having that stability in their lives helps them a lot. So if it's for performance reasons, I don't think there's a good reason to get rid of them in the middle of the season. Now, if there's mistreatment of players, if there's some other scandalous activity, that's different. But if it's simply because you're not winning enough games, make that change after the season, yet let the young people in that program continue to have that source of stability in their lives for the course of that season, because then that translates into having more capacity to deal with the stresses of academics and everything else that comes with being a college student. But that's not what's happening, in part because those same people who are, in many cases, providing a bunch of money to that NIL collective, they want to see not just returns, they want to see immediate returns on what they see as an investment in that program, so that that team that they enjoy, that program that they support, has immediate success this season.
We're having a conversation about the landscape of college sports, a conversation that we would not have had a couple of years ago. Not in this way.
And who could have forecast this? No. It's not all that long ago that, if you remember, the players at Northwestern sued to try to form an organized labor union. Okay? They tried that remedy to address what I already talked about at the start of the program, where I think, an unfair model that we had 10 or 15 years ago, whenever it was that they sued. But now we're talking about something completely different that I think needs to be recalibrated.
J.J. Boehm is our guest this morning from SVSU. He's the Executive Director of Communications. He's the football broadcaster and a great knowledge of college sports in general, over his life. And we're tapping into that knowledge this morning. Charlie in for Art this morning. We'll be back in just a moment. Mutual of college sports in general, he's paid attention to all his life. And we're having a conversation just because there has been a changing landscape in college sports that we're barely scratching the surface. And we knew we wouldn't have enough time to talk about all this just because of what's going on. And again, I think we kind of mentioned this before the break, but we are talking again against, do we call it a specialized segment when we're talking about the student-athlete, the athlete-student that is getting involved in this transfer portal and the money that's being made? It's out there, but the overwhelming vast majority of kids who are going to college, even if they're playing some kind of sport, are still going there because they have the educational aspect first.
I do think that tends to be true. However, what you're also seeing with the transfer portal in many cases is young person is dissatisfied, so they jump into the transfer portal. They don't find a home, right? That is one of, in my judgment, the underreported stories, is how many young people are playing for their program, whether they see it themselves or the people who are in their inner circle are telling them, oh, you can go play at XYZ institution, you're that good. They go put their name in the transfer portal thinking that's what's going to happen, and then that doesn't materialize. And now what happens to you? In too many cases, they're left with no competitive opportunity at all. So I do want to point that out, because I think that also has flown largely under the radar, because there's so many young people who, again, they're chasing whatever their dream is, and they go after that, and it's a game of musical chairs, and when the music stops